Welcome to Evil Done Badly, the most uninformative true crime podcast in existence. We've got a review to share with you this week. Now, we haven't heard from him in a while, but our most dedicated heckler is back with his yearly review of the podcast. Let's have a listen to this audio review that Marty Bass was nice enough to send in.
Hello, this is Marty Bass, 1976. It's been approximately a year since I submitted a review of Evil Done Badly, hosted by Dick. I'm very disappointed to say, in the last year, the quality of this podcast has amazingly deteriorated. Way to go, Dick! Keep it up!
You can tell he's real impressed with the progress we've made over the last year of crappy episodes. So, thanks for sending that in, Marty. It's great to know someone out there is listening to us, even if they hate our guts. It still means a lot. Now, what about this week's episode? Maybe this episode will be so awesome that even Marty will have to admit how fantastic it was. But, I wouldn't get my hopes up if I were you. We haven't done a crazy cult story in a while, unless you count the Ripper Crew from a few episodes ago, which was just really one bully and three morons in a van. It's a disgusting, terrible episode, and you should go check it out if you haven't already. Either way, they're not really much of a cult. This guy, Michael Ryan, he assembled a cult that was a little bit too big to fit in a van. His cult, called the Church of Yahweh, wasn't huge. It wasn't Jonestown size or anything like that. But it probably included somewhere between 25 and 30 people. The Evil Done Badly podcast has a small cult following as well, but you can fit the whole cult on a unicycle. It's pretty tiny. But before we get into the story of this batch of inbred nut jobs from Nebraska, let's grab a beverage, hold on to our jiggly arses, and let's hear the theme song. This episode of Evil Done Badly is brought to you by the fine folks over at the Wide World of Paranormal Investigations and Ridiculous Thrifter groups over on Facebook. One covers paranormal stuff like aliens and Bigfoot, and one covers thrift culture and contains a lot of wacky prices and puns. So check them out if you haven't already. Now back to the show. This might come as a bit of a surprise, but I'm not any kind of a farmer. It sounds fucking hard, and I can't see why anyone would do it. But I am thankful that somebody does it because I'm pretty sure that's where granola bars come from. Anyways, in the 1980s, in the USA, the life of a farmer was an even more miserable existence than it normally is. There was too much wheat to go around, and the prices went down the toilet. So every hick in a pair of overalls was too broke to even afford the yarn to mend the holes in their overalls. So the overalls would fall down around their ankles, and their arses would stick out. It's not a fun time. So these poor, disgruntled, arse-exposing farmers were looking for ways to provide for themselves and their families. And things were getting pretty desperate. Michael Ryan, he's one of these desperate people. He's unemployed, he has a bad back, and he's resorted to smoking weed every day to help him cope with his inability to provide for his wife and child. Hey, it's 420, that's pretty appropriate. I'm not sure the wife and child liked marijuana as much as he did, and they probably would have preferred if he bought food with whatever money he did have. It doesn't matter if your kids are starving. Weed is always in the budget because daddy needs his dope. These are words to live by. We are educational, as we've said here before. So Michael here, he's in need of guidance, and he starts following this guy named James Wickstrom. Wickstrom is the leader of something called the Christian Identity Movement. This group is anti-government, anti-Semitic, and otherwise racist. I'm not sure there was any actual point to the movement, other than it was an excuse to act like a complete prick in the name of God. Or Yahweh, as they like to call him. Which, oddly enough, is a Hebrew word, and it's kind of in conflict with the anti-Semitism thing they've got going on, and it takes a big jump of logic to separate the two. But it's not going to make any more sense as we move along here. And like any good cult full of loopy, brainwashed idiots, they were all about the end of the world as well. It's pretty standard for this sort of thing. I mean, doesn't any cult ever look at the previous doomsday cult and go, gee, these people from this other cult said the world was going to end. And you know what? It didn't. This other cult, these people, they were wrong. This makes them look not very smart. So maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should not say the world is going to end, because it's an entirely likely event that it won't end. And we don't want to look like batshit nutjobs any more than we already do. Those other stupid wackos from those other cults, let them be the stupid nutjobs. My God. Our cult, not like those cults. We're full of smart people. Probably not. This never seems to occur to anybody in a doomsday cult. I guess if your followers are afraid of the apocalypse, I guess it makes them easier to control. Yeah, see? I'm not smart enough to run a cult. I could never figure that out. Anyways, moving on. So, Michael, he becomes Wickstrom's right-hand man, and he learns the ropes of this nutty group and starts to acquire his own dedicated group of disenchanted dunderheads. He starts using this scam called the arm test. It involves touching people's shoulders and elbows and, well, getting them to answer you in a way that you want them to, and it gets them to agree to anything. And it makes very little sense, but it's all right because Yahweh wants him to do so, according to him. So in doing so, Ryan here, he meets a Rick Stice, who's very poor and owns a pig farm. Rick lives on the farm with his 3 children. His wife had just died of cancer because they couldn't afford any treatment. And, well, he's vulnerable, and he's particularly open to hearing about Mike Ryan's nutty, racist, hateful, end-of-the-world philosophy. He's despondent enough to go along with pretty much anything at this point. So, Ryan just up and moves his own family and the rest of the cult onto Stice's farm, where they spend all day smoking weed and amassing weapons for Armageddon. The Armageddon he's referring to is the one prophesied about in the book of Revelation. And by now, Ryan is claiming to be possessed by the spirit of the Archangel Michael. Funny how that works out, isn't it? This guy says he's possessed by a spiteful angel dude named Michael, and his current earthly name is also Michael. This sounds like one of those times the Lord works in mysterious ways or something. So that's a serendipitous coincidence. So obviously this guy, he's destined for greatness. Wow. So anyway, this guy pretends that God told him to lead an army against the forces of Satan in the ultimate battle of good versus evil. Fuck. This is intense. I wonder who's gonna win. Now, I'm rooting for the devil. I always do. But don't worry, by the end of this story, the devil, he's gonna seem like a nice guy. He's gonna seem like a Boy Scout. And he's gonna be one of those good Boy Scouts, not one of those asshole pedo Boy Scouts. So, Ryan here dubs himself the king, much like LeBron James, and awards himself 4 wives. He comes to the conclusion that having a pig farm isn't kosher, and decides that the 25-person or so group would be more kosher by stealing farm equipment and using the proceeds to buy guns. This Torah book, or whatever they call it, must have some fucked up commandments. So Michael here, he has his little group of destitute, brainwashed farmer people, and they're doing his bidding and stealing all the pitchforks and wheelbarrows that they can for him. He's got 4 wives, a bunch of children, and everyone is living happily ever after. That is, at least until the apocalypse, which he won't shut up about. I mean, he is some sort of divine being after all, and he deserves all the stolen tractors and sex slaves his followers can dig up for him while they're waiting for the world to end. So, now it's 1985, and all is well in Happy Town. It's going so well, and it starts to fall apart. And life on the farm starts to become a little more, turbulent. See, there's only so long you can go around calling yourself King Yahweh and telling people you're an archangel going to war with the forces of evil when the apocalypse happens. Eventually, no matter how brainwashed they are, some of them are going to catch on. Not to mention, he's stealing everyone's wives and banging them silly with his fat hairy ass. There's only so long you can behave like this before people start to question your ultimate authority. This is where it starts to get terribly extra terrible. A couple of members start to doubt Ryan's claims of being a deity and are not so sure that Armageddon is right around the corner. James Thim and Rick Stice, the guy with the original pig farm, and unfortunately his 5-year-old son Luke, well, they start dissenting, and Michael is not too thrilled about him. Mike demotes them to the rank of slaves. Apparently, Ryan made up 6 or 7 pretend ranks for his followers to aspire to. Slaves? That was the bottom one. I'm not sure what ranks that lie above slaves, but I'm sure they're plenty prestigious, whatever they are. So, what did this earn the 3 of these poor dissenting people? Well, they would get chained to the porch and made to sleep out there, and that's the good bit. They were also made to bang the goats and each other, and well, I guess depending on how they felt about goat sex and sodomy, maybe they liked it, maybe it was more pleasurable than Michael intended for it to be, but there's no way of knowing how they felt about it, and from what I can tell, they weren't too gone on it. Now, you would think that they'd run away if they hated it that much. I'm sure running away is the first thing that comes across their mind, but it's probably not as easy as it sounds. This Mike guy is well armed with guns and ammo that he had bought out of the proceeds of all their petty pilfering. So they were probably fearing for their lives, and poor Rick and Luke, well, they would get forced to fillet each other, and that's all sorts of fucked up, and it goes without saying. In case you missed it, this Mike Ryan dude, he's a cunt. Now, he would get particularly mean with little Luke. He would berate him, and the child abuse got ratcheted up a notch. Luke was shot in the arm, burnt with cigarettes, and dangled from his neck at the end of a leash. One report says that Luke was killed by the dangling at the end of a leash. Now, a different report that I read says that Mike picked up little Luke and slammed him into a wooden cabinet so hard that little Luke suffered a fatal head injury. And, well, Mike made Rick and James bury him in an unmarked grave. Now, believe whatever you want, it's too fucking disturbing. Whichever way it went down is fucking terrible. So, Mike here chalks up little Luke's death to Luke being, quote, the seed of Satan, unquote. Afterwards, Rick would attempt to run away multiple times before running away for good in early April, leaving his 2 other young children on the compound, and I hope they got away okay. So Rick is gone. Luke is dead, and that leaves one ungrateful slave who's stuck there, and he is James Thim. According to Ryan, James attempted to poison everybody at a communal meal. Ryan, well, whether he made it up or not, I don't know, but he made it clear that he didn't appreciate the gesture and decided that James would have to pay for his treachery. So James is dragged out to the former pig pen, tied on, and repeatedly had farm implements shoved up his bum. Mike Ryan enlisted his 16-year-old son Dennis and 4 other people to assist in the abuse. Among the list of tortures inflicted on poor James, this is all obviously in the name of Yahweh, there was a whole bunch of deep, violent sodomy with shovels and picks, repeated whippings by each member of the torture team, having his fingers blown off with handguns. He had his arms and legs broken. He had part of his legs skinned and shown back to him. And he had, well, Mike himself stomped on his ribs until they were shattered. And finally, Mike had one of them shoot him in the head. And from what I'm told, during all of this, poor James never did denounce Yahweh. So he was true right to the very end. And he was also buried in an unmarked grave on the grounds. Yeah, so this is disgusting. This poor bastard endured days of this. And I can't believe that no one in the fucking place ever thought to turn a gun on Mike himself. He didn't own the farm. It's not like the bill collectors were going to come looking for Mike Ryan. No one was going to show up. They could have wiped him out. No one would have cared. Problem solved. Of course, it's hard to solve a problem when you've been brainwashed into thinking there isn't one. Now, this terrible case is highly reminiscent of the case of Rock Terrio and the Anthill Kids. We covered this bastard way back in episode 3 on Evil Done Badly. He's a Canadian sicko who also murdered his followers in the name of God or some form of deity that he made up. Check it out if you haven't already. This is 50 episodes ago or so, and, well, it's at the same quality as this one. We sucked then, we sucked now. There you go. If you want another disgusting episode to go, check that one out. So, okay. We now have a dead child and a dead adult buried on the property. The dead child's dad ran away, and we still have a group of approximately 25 semi-religious wackos living on the farm. Now, how long can these fuckers keep going? Well, fortunately, the answer is not that long. So, a couple months later in June, 2 members of the torture team, John Andreas and James Haverkamp, they get arrested while stealing some farm equipment. Now, for a bunch of people whose sole way of earning a living is stealing stuff, they've got away with it for a decently long while, because when the police search the farm, they find a stockpile of weapons, about 150,000 rounds of ammunition, and about 250,000 in stolen property. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but I imagine when you're surrounded by nothing but poor farmer people, getting a decent price for any of this crap is, well, not easy, so it's probably more like $100 or so. So, here's a typical stolen good fencing conversation as I see it happening back then. The thief says, "Hey, I'm selling this stolen farm equipment. Want to buy some?" And the poor farmer looks at him and goes, I'm too poor to buy that. And then he leans over and he looks a little closer and he goes, "Hey, wait a minute. That looks like my tractor. I just happen to be missing a tractor." And then the thief goes, "Oh, well, never mind. I'll sell it to someone that I didn't steal it from in the first place." Something like that. So you're only going to be selling it back to the people you already stole it from. So good luck getting a good return on that. Either way, no one can afford anything. They're all broke, and their arses are all hanging out of their overalls. So Haverkamp and Andreas are being interviewed, and they casually mention that there might be a couple of dead bodies out at the compound. I guess they had had enough of Mike and his shenanigans. And the police say to themselves, "Hey, these guys are pretty good at stealing tractors. Maybe they're upstanding people and we should take them seriously." So a month or so later, they come back and they search the farm and they dig up the bodies of little Luke Stice and James Thim. So the whole thing gets blown wide open, and when it's all sorted out, Mike and his son Dennis and Haverkamp are charged with first-degree murder. Haverkamp, well, he squeals. He squeals like the pigs they don't have anymore, and he pleads guilty to second-degree murder. He was asked why he tortured James Thim, and he answered, quote, "Because that's what Yahweh wanted," unquote. And, okay. 16-year-old Dennis gets convicted of second-degree murder, but it gets downgraded to manslaughter. And he serves 12 years in prison. I'm not sure how much laughing he did while he was there, but he was released in 1997 and has nothing good to say about his old man. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, yes, he had a hand in killing a guy, but it was all because his dad was a fucking psycho and probably would have killed him too if he didn't do it. And he was only 16 at the time, but at least he got out and he still has a few good years left to try and move on with his life. Now, back to King Mike. He got convicted of first and second degree murder and sentenced to death. Yay! Break all his bones and impale him on a pitchfork. But, as we all know, getting an executed is a tangly mess of bureaucracy and misguided, supposedly ethical people getting their frilly panties all twisted into a bunch. So there's delay after delay, and Mike's, well, he gets to sit around in prison, and he gets to not be killed, and he gets to waste taxpayer money for about 30 years. He eventually dies of cancer in 2015, all the while claiming no responsibility for his actions and blaming it all on Yahweh. Dennis, little Dennis, had his heartwarming send-off for his pa. Quote, "Good riddance, flush him down the toilet for all I care," unquote. Yep, fuck that guy. Timothy Haverkamp ended up serving 23 years of a 10 years to life sentence, and he's now a free man. His life sentence was commuted, which is apparently not that easy to do, and as far as I know, he's allowed to move around and do whatever he wants these days. I'm not sure what happened to Rick Stice or his kids. I couldn't find anything on the internet about him. At least no website would tell me about him without me having to pay for it. And we all know how I feel about paying for things. I'm just not going at it. I'd rather be uninformed. I'm uninformed about most things, and I'm quite comfortable with it. I'd rather be uninformed than pay 99 cents for a trial subscription to a website I've never heard of, and then never cancel it and get charged $5 a month until the end of time. $5 will I'll buy a couple boxes of Kraft dinner anyways, and maybe my kids won't starve. And that's about all I had to say about this stupid Mike Ryan cunt. He should have been painfully killed and stuffed in a cave somewhere, never to be seen again. But he got off pretty easy. And there you have it. Another brain-dead episode of the worst true crime podcast ever. Evil Done Badly is in the books. And if you would like to reach out and suggest future episode topics, we can be reached on Instagram or YouTube at Evil Done Badly, or by email at evildonebadly@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. I'm so glad you're here. Tell your friends so they can have their brains poisoned by us too. My name's Dick, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.